You ever have one of those moments where your life flips upside down in a single heartbeat? Where the air feels heavier, the clock ticks louder, and you realize, without warning, that everything is about to change. That's exactly what happened to me. My name's Laura Mitchell, I'm 42, and this is a story of how one unexpected gesture from my stepson set off a chain of events I never could have predicted. If you'd asked me 10 years ago what my life would look like now, I'd have painted you a picture of quiet, simple happiness. Maybe a cozy house, a husband who made me laugh, family dinners where we all talked over each other. But reality had other plans. Divorce hit me like a storm I didn't see coming, and when the dust settled, it was just me and Ethan. Ethan came into my life when he was 10, a quiet kid with big eyes that seemed to hold more questions than answers. His father, Tom, and I tried to make it work for a while, but love doesn't always last the way you want it to. When Tom walked out, I watched Ethan stand at the front window, frozen, as if hoping the car might turn around. It never did. That moment seared itself into me, and I swore I'd never let him feel abandoned again. The years that followed were a blur of work, bills, and late-night talks over bowls of cereal. Ethan wasn't like other boys his age. He preferred the stillness of home over the noise of crowds. While other teens were out at parties, he'd be in the kitchen helping me cook or sitting quietly in the living room with a book. I worried about him, but he always brushed it off. "I'm fine, Lauren," he'd say, and sometimes I believe him. But time moves fast. Too fast. One day you're helping with homework. The next you're looking across the table at a young man whose voice is deeper, whose shoulders are broader, and you realize he's not a boy anymore. The shift came one quiet evening. We were both in the living room, the hum of the TV filling the silence. I noticed Ethan was fidgeting, his hands moving restlessly in his lap. His eyes darted toward me and then away again. Something was building, and I could feel it before he spoke. "Lauren," he said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." I set my tea down, my pulse quickening. I thought maybe it was about confessed trouble at school, or maybe that he was thinking about moving out. But what came next caught me off guard. He admitted he'd been feeling disconnected, lonely, not just in a social sense, but in a way that made him feel like he was on the outside of life looking in. There was a vulnerability in his voice I hadn't heard before, and in that moment, my instinct wasn't a lecture. It was to listen. The words he chose were careful, almost cautious, but the emotion beneath them was raw. He wasn't asking for solutions. He just needed to be seen. And then he did something unexpected. He reached across the space between us, took my hand, and held it. It wasn't casual. His fingers lingered, his touch warm, hesitant, searching. My first instinct was to pull away, but I didn't. Something in me, something I'm still not sure I understand, kept me there. That touch stirred something complicated in me. It wasn't about crossing lines. It was about the weight of years we'd spent leaning on each other, about the unspoken closeness we'd built in the absence of anyone else. It was a reminder of how much we meant to each other, maybe more than either of us realized until then. Over the next few weeks, things shifted subtly. Ethan seemed lighter somehow, more talkative. He'd linger in the kitchen when I cooked, leaning against the counter, watching me with an attentiveness I wasn't used to. Sometimes I'd catch him looking, his gaze holding mine just a fraction longer than normal. And I didn't hate it. That's the part that's hard to admit. I'd been so focused on being the strong one for so long that the idea of being noticed, really noticed, hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I told myself it was harmless, just a phase for him, and maybe a fleeting ego boost for me. But in quiet moments, I could feel something deeper pulling at the edges of my thoughts. Then came Daniel. He was a friend of a friend, the kind of man who carried his charm like a second skin. He had this easy smile and a voice that could fill a room without trying. He started coming by for coffee, then for dinner. The more time I spent with him, the more I remembered what it felt like to be wanted by someone my own age. But Ethan noticed. The first time Daniel stayed over, I didn't hide it. I thought Ethan would be fine. After all, we'd always been honest with each other. But the next morning, when he came into the kitchen and saw Daniel sitting there, sipping coffee like he belonged, I saw the flicker of something sharp in his eyes. Over the next week, the tension in the house grew. Ethan's conversations became clipped, his tone colder. The breaking point came one night when Daniel and I were on the couch, laughing over some old story. Ethan walked in, his expression unreadable at first. Then it shifted into something darker. "Do you even care about me anymore?" he blurted out. His voice cracked on the last word. I froze. Daniel sat back, awkward, while Ethan's anger poured out, about the way I'd been pulling away, about how Daniel was suddenly in spaces that had always been ours. It wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. Fear of losing the one steady connection he'd had for years. That night, after Daniel left, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room. His words kept replaying in my head. I realized I'd been so wrapped up in my own need for freedom, for connection, that I'd missed how lost he was feeling. The next morning, I knocked on his bedroom door. It took a while, but he opened it. His eyes were guarded, but I could see the hurt underneath. "Ethan," I said quietly, "we need to talk. And more than that, we need help." A week later, we were sitting in a family therapist's office. Dr. Sarah Carter had this way of asking questions that didn't feel like prying. Slowly, Ethan began to open up. He talked about how the house had felt different since Daniel, how our closeness had been both a comfort and a confusion for him. I admitted my own faults, how I'd blurred lines in ways I shouldn't have, how I'd avoided hard conversations because I didn't want to lose him. Therapy wasn't easy. There were days we left feeling more drained than when we walked in. But little by little, we started to rebuild. Ethan found new outlets, joined a boxing class, made friends there. I worked on letting go of my own fears, trusting that he could stand on his own. Months later, we were sitting on the porch at sunset. The air was warm, the sky streaked with gold. Ethan looked at me and said, "Thanks for trying, Lauren." It was simple, but it landed deep. I reached over, squeezed his hand. This time, the gesture wasn't complicated. It was just love, the kind that stays even when it changes. We're still figuring things out. Mistakes don't disappear, but they don't have to define you. What matters is what you do next. And if you ever found yourself in a situation that challenged the way you see someone or yourself, you know how hard that road can be. Life doesn't come with a manual. It comes with moments, unexpected, complicated, beautiful, and messy. And it's up to us to decide what we make of them. So, what would you do if the lines in your life suddenly blurred? Would you step back? Or would you lean in and see where the truth really lies?